Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 360 on History, where we journey through history and science to uncover fascinating stories. I'm your host, Saima Beg, and today we have two extremely interesting topics to explore, not least because we missed a podcast last week, so I'm doing two this week. It is going to be a little longer. First, we are taking a deep dive into the evidence of the first women led society in Britain, and then we look at a groundbreaking revelation in linguistic and genetic research about the origins of Indo European languages. I have to say, this is a topic that really fascinates me how language spread. So grab a cup of tea, sit back, and let's get started. First, we travel back over 6,000 years to a time when society was very different from what we know today. The idea of a women-led society might sound revolutionary, but for those of us intrigued by history's complexities, the evidence is slowly surfacing to show that this may have been a reality. In 2020, a stunning discovery at the ancient burial site of Sutton Hoo, one of the most significant archaeological sites in Britain, offered new insights into the power dynamics of early societies. For centuries, this site was considered a burial ground for Anglo Saxon elites, but research has now revealed something different, that women played pivotal roles in the ruling structures. Also, recent studies of skeletons, burial practices, and artifacts suggest that a powerful matrilineal society existed in prehistoric Britain, long before the arrival of the Romans or the establishment of kingdoms. Archaeologists found evidence of women in leadership roles who may have been responsible for the governance of tribes or even the community at large. So, one such tribe or discovery is the Durrington Wall site, where researchers found evidence of a ceremonial structure believed to be associated with ritual practices that could have been led by women. The remains of women at this site were often buried with lavish grave goods, hinting at high status and possibly political power. But how do we know these women led societies existed? Well, in part, it's due to the gender specific artifacts found in these graves. From the positioning of the burial sites to the items left with them, these clues strongly indicate that women were not just wives and mothers, but figures of authority, perhaps even the key to leadership. But there's also more recent evidence, that of DNA. And this brings us to new research published in January 2025 that reveals something fascinating. Genetic analysis of people buried in a 2,000-year-old cemetery in southern England has bolstered the idea that Celtic communities in Britain placed women center stage, showing that women remained in their ancestral homes while men moved in from other communities, a practice that actually lasted centuries. This research was done on the Durotriges tribe that lived in southern England, but the researchers also expanded their study to the whole of Britain, and data from an earlier large genetic survey of Iron Age Britain from cemeteries across Britain showed that most individuals were maternal descendants of a small set of female ancestors, once again indicating that social networks revolved around women in Britain at that time. This research on the Durotriges tribe and wider Britain from the Iron Age suggests that women had a higher status in society in Britain before the arrival of Romans. So a little bit about the Durotriges, who they occupy the central southern English coast from around 100 BC to 100 AD, and they probably spoke a Celtic language. And it seems their women stayed within their ancestral communities. Now, human remains from Iron Age Britain are rare because prevailing funerary customs included cremation or depositing bodies in wetlands, which destroyed them. However, the Durotriges bury their dead in regular cemeteries in the chalk landscape, which aided their preservation. Archaeologists have also found that Euritrigan women were more often buried with valuable items, suggesting high status and possibly a society focused on women. Now, this finding challenges the long held belief that prehistoric societies were strictly patriarchal. Instead, it opens up new perspectives on how early British society might have been structured, shifting a view from a male dominated history to one where women had agency and influence. You cannot have a better story for Women History Month. As researchers continue to uncover burial sites and analyze ancient skeletal remains, it's clear that history is far more complex and diverse than we once thought. The discovery of women led societies in early Britain remind us that power dynamics in ancient times weren't as uniform as we've been led to believe. Happy Women's History Month, everyone. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another fascinating discovery, one that touches the very essence of language, culture, and migration, another one of my favorite topics. We're talking about the origins of the Indo European language family, which is spoken by nearly half the world's population today. Now, recent genetic research has unlocked new information about how and when the ancestors of these languages spread across Europe and Asia. Thanks to groundbreaking DNA analysis, scientists have traced the origin of Indo European languages to a group of people who lived over 6,500 years ago. So, let's go back to the beginning. The Indo European language family includes many of the most widely spoken languages today, from English to Hindi, Russian to Spanish. You can listen to our podcast, episode 28, that talks about the history of the alphabet and how languages developed. So, where did these languages come from and how did they spread so far and wide? Genetic research, led by a team of scientists from across Europe, has finally provided some answers. By sequencing the DNA from ancient human remains found in graves and burial sites across Europe and Asia, they've been able to map the migration of early human populations who spoke these languages. The breakthrough actually came from the study of individual from the Yamnaya culture, a group of Bronze Age nomads who lived on the steppes of what is now modern day Ukraine and southern Russia. So, about 5,000 years ago, these people began to migrate both to the west and the east, bringing with them not only their distinctive genetic markers, but also their language. Over time, the Yamnaya culture's language spread across vast regions, influencing the development of languages in Europe, the Middle East, and even parts of South Asia. This migration and the accompanying linguistic diffusion reshaped entire civilizations. But there was one problem. Researchers encountered a hitch within the Yamnaya line in the Anatolian Peninsula. So, what had been believed was that the Yamnaya people are the ones who spread the Indo European language everywhere. But when they came to the Anatolian Peninsula, which is modern day Turkey, an extinct set of Indo European languages was spoken there during the Bronze Age. Now, linguists have long believed they represent an early split from Proto Indo European language. In the 21st century, ancient DNA science gave us similar conclusions. The researchers had hypothesized an earlier population to be the ultimate source in Indo European languages, and this earlier population, they believed, may have given rise to the language spread by the Yamnaya and also the extinct Anatolian language in modern day Turkey. Now, two new studies suggest that this could be the case. And these studies say that the Caucasus Lower Volga people appear to be that original source, with newly uncovered links to both the Yamnaya and the ancient Indo Anatolian speakers who inhabited an area that is now part of Turkey. One paper focusing on the origins of Indo European languages uses ancient DNA from 354 individuals at sites in Russia and southeastern Europe. And a second paper written with researchers in Kiev, analyzes 81 ancient DNA samples from Ukraine and Moldova. Additionally, nearly 1,000 previously reported ancient individuals' genetic data was also included in the analyses. And the analysis shows that this Proto Indo European language was spread further into the rest of the world by the Yamnaya people, and that it became the Anatolian family of languages spoken, for example, by the Hittites who lived in Anatolia in the Bronze Age. So, what makes this discovery so significant is that it combines both linguistic and genetic evidence. By sequencing ancient DNA from across multiple regions, scientists have not only mapped out the genetic roots of modern populations but have also traced how the spread of languages occurred alongside these migrations. So, to summarize a bit more, people from the Caucasus, from the lower Volga region, brought their language, which was kind of like the grandfather of our languages, into what is now Ukraine and the regions around it. And from there, this language was spread by the Yamnaya people in one form and moved and existed in Anatolia in another form. Isn't that cool? Now, this study reveals that these ancient people weren't just travelers, they were carriers of culture, language, and ideas, and their influence spread across vast areas. Through these migrations, languages evolved and adapted to newer environments, eventually leading to the diverse range of Indo European languages that we speak today. For instance, the spread of these early languages explain helps to explain why there are linguistic connections between, say, English and Sanskrit, or why European languages share certain grammatical structures and vocabulary. The story of the Yamnaya migration and the earlier one of the Caucasus Lower Volga people is one of cultural exchange, adaptation, and survival as language becomes a tool for unifying diverse people across great distances. Thank you for joining me on this episode of 360 on History podcast. I've been your host, Saima Beg. Please do check out our archive of podcast episodes, our website 360onhistory.com, which is home to hundreds of blog posts and videos on science, history, and nature. And do join us on all the social media. It is Yesterday was the spring equinox, so happy spring, Northern Hemisphere, and happy autumn, the Southern Hemisphere. See you next time.